in a time close to 92 AD, within the ancient city of Emesa, Syria, Pope Anicetus was born. He spent much of his early life in Emesa. From what little we know, he eventually made his way to Rome, where his papacy begins. During Anicetus's papacy, future Pope Eleutherius was put into the deaconate and served in Rome under Anicetus himself. We'll come back to Eleutherius, but for now we're sticking with Anicetus. Saint Polycarp of Smyrna, who was a bishop over these lands, visited Anicetus in Rome during the early years of his papacy. This concerned the Easter controversy. Now Easter is kind of important for all those who aren't Christians out there. It's a pretty big deal, so big that this meeting was a colossal one for the church. It would decide a very important debate that had sprung up within the Western and Eastern churches, and required the Pope's personal attention, in order to ensure that nothing could go wrong, or there would be disastrous consequences. It was to decide if Easter should be celebrated on the 14th day of the time of Jesus' death, or if you should celebrate it on the following Sunday that precedes after the day of his death instead. They butted heads, spoke harsh facts, and said some nasty things to each other. Truly, doing God's work. Although the two individuals could not agree on a date that both the East and West could share, Anicetus did allow Polycarp of Smyrna to continue his practice of celebrating the 14th day of Nisan instead of the following Sunday. Since much of the Holy Land was already accustomed to this tradition, and it's not like the Easter controversy would ever come up ever again. Anicetus also actively opposed the Gnostics and Marcionism during his papacy. This is why many historians believe he held a papal decree that priests cannot have long hair in office, as Gnostics were commonly known to have long hair. Finally, during the papacy of Anicetus, the ancient historian, Saint Hegesippus, visited Rome during his time to help establish the Church as a legitimate organization in Rome. It is thanks to these early works that the Church managed to grow even more. From there, Anicetus apparently died as a martyr, but many believe that this is false, as there is no documentation proving this. But wait.
I thought you said that Eleutherius was going to be Pope. Where's Eleutherius?
Well, that's where Soter's story begins. Soter was born in Fondi, Campania, today's Lazio region in Italy, and eventually moved towards the grand city of Rome. We can conclude that since he was a part of the clergy, moving to Rome would have been a logical step at the time. Now when Soter became Pope, Eleutherius was still a deacon in Rome. But don't worry, we'll get to Eleutherius soon enough. Soter was well known for being a charitable Christian. In fact, he was praised by Dionysius of Corinth for his charity towards exiled Christians during his entire papacy. Something still in practice today. Soter also made marriage between a man and a woman of faith into a sacrament that could only be blessed by a priest. During the time of Soter, within the province of Asia Minor, the Montanist movement sprung up, spreading towards much of Italy, Rome and some parts of Gaul as well. Particularly within the town of Lyon, wrote to the Pope with concerns to the movements. However, as an important note, within its nature, referring to Montanism, did not diverge so much from the orthodoxy of the time for it to initially be labeled heresy in context. Wanting unity within the Church as a whole, Pope Soter was accounted by Saint Augustine as, quote,
Holy Soter, Pope of the city, wrote against them a book, as did the master, Apollonius of Ephesus. Against these wrote the priest Tertullian of Carthage, who in all ways wrote well, wrote first and wrote incomparably. In this alone did reprehensibly, that he defended Montanus, acting against the command of Pope Soter of Rome as mentioned earlier, asserting the talk of infants' blood to be false, asserting one God in Trinity, the penitence for the lapsed, one Easter with the same ceremonies as ours.
End of quote. Soter saw the formal inauguration of Easter as an annual festival in Rome. So this may be the evidence that suggests that while it wasn't just a doctrine or theological stance but a personal one too that he took on the Montanist movement. Now as Soter got older, he made one final request before his death. to have a certain deacon take his place as the next pope. And now finally, after waiting almost 20 years, and studying much of the scriptures, we get the man, the myth, the legend himself. Eleutherius' story begins at the ancient town of Nicopolis, Epirus. Around 130 AD, he grew up in Greece for most of his life, until he moved to the grand city of Rome. His contemporary Hegesippus, yes, that Hegesippus, wrote a lot about Eleutherius. In fact, he wrote down everything from the time of Anicetus and Soter, during the papacy of Eleutherius. Then when Soter died, he took over the head of the church. Why did a deacon become pope and not a priest or bishop? Don't know, Hegesippus must have run out of papyrus or something. Eleutherius created a law that allowed Christians to eat all common food and should not be turned away, unlike the Jewish practices at the time, or even similar laws practiced by the Gnostics and Montanists. This was in accordance to the Liber Pontificalis. Now Pope Eleutherius was associated with something called the British Mission. Sadly, this is fake and was disproved by the Christian historians Haddon, Stubbs, and Wilkins. The Church, either accidentally, or even purposely, created a pious fraud. The actual letter detailed in the story came from Syria, not Britain. From a king in the fortress of Edessa, who was already Christian. Not a British king who was seeking to become Christian. Glad we could clear that up. Pope Eleutherius was actually for once known for something else, something we haven't really been able to provide. He died on the 24th day of May, and was buried near where Peter was at the time. His remains would be moved twice before being put to rest. But Eleutherius was one of the first popes with a detailed death and burial. Pope Victor I was born in the early 2nd century. In the Roman province of Africa, possible in the city of Lepidus Magna. Eventually making his way to Rome, sources dispute where he started his papacy, as many surviving primary sources are actually copies of originals that have not survived in time. Though we are certain he did start around the year 189 AD. Pope Victor started his papacy by excommunicating Theodotus of Byzantium, under the basis that he was preaching that Christ, part of the Holy Trinity, was only a mere man, adopted by God upon his baptism. But the biggest thing that Victor was known for, was indeed the role he played in the Quartodeciman controversy, within the times of Anicetus, Soter, and Eleutherius. The Church had tried to negotiate with the province of Asia Minor several times about the feast of Passover. Victor would be the one to finally put his foot down. Victor demanded to know from Polycrates himself, as to why he would not follow in the position that Rome had dictated. In response, Polycrates wrote a letter detailing that he had bore witness to two of Jesus's apostles, Philip and John, Philip's 3 daughters, Polycarp himself, who dealt with most of the popes in the 2nd century, Thraces and Sigares, who were bishops of the Eastern churches, Papirius and Melito, holy men of the church in the 2nd century, and to top it off, several other bishops and priests who were unnamed according to primary sources submitted that this was indeed the correct practice according to the teachings of Christ himself. Once receiving this letter, Victor ordered that Polycrates, along with the entire province of Asia Minor, be excommunicated from the church, causing much outcry from the rest of the known world. While agreeing with Rome of the issue of Passover, they did not agree with how their brothers and sisters of Christ were being treated. Many bishops even condemned Victor for doing this, including Irenaeus of Lyon. Victor backed off, seeing the writing on the wall, did not excommunicate the churches of Asia Minor. However, he sowed the seeds of dissent within Rome and many other theologians towards the attitude of Asia Minor's unique status towards Passover. From here Victor's life isn't recorded at all aside from his death in 199 AD. Pope Zephyrinus was born within the grand city of Rome, and was the one to succeed Victor I. However, during the papacy of Zephyrinus, one would contest his papacy for the first time. Natalius, the first anti-pope of the series. While Natalius was busy accepting bribes left, right and center, Zephyrinus dealt with Emperor Septimius Severus. He had passed to edict of persecution. This prohibited Christians from assembling for worship and ordered the destruction of their scriptures, liturgical books, and places of worship across the empire. On top of this, Zephyrinus combated many more new heresies and apostasies, even being accused of being seduced by monarchian views. For most of his life he suffered mentally and physically. Natalius for a while enjoyed his time as an direct opponent to Zephyrinus. He was enjoying himself one day, when several angels came to him. He was overcome with emotion, so much he went to Zephyrinus personally naked, and tearfully begged him to allow him to return in communion with Rome. Which Zephyrinus agreed to, seeing that he had overcome his ways of abusing his power. Natalius's part in history ends with that a heavy-hearted Zephyrinus went to his chair one last time, recorded as being one of the few people who endured so much he was awarded the title of martyr despite not actually dying to the certain circumstances. Before he died, Zephyrinus ordained a young man by the name of Callistus, the Callistus I.
You know which channels to check out, so please, give us some support.
Remember now, take care, stay safe, and God bless you all. We'll see you in the next video.
If you choose